The forever Superman in every sense of that phrase, Christopher Reeve was born 72 years ago today.
The Christopher and Dana Reeve Paralysis Act.
People are literally walking because of him.
What is a hero? My answer was that a hero is someone who commits a courageous action without considering the consequences. Now my definition is completely different. I think a hero is an ordinary individual who finds the strength to persevere and endure in spite of overwhelming obstacles.
I wouldn't have missed this for the world.
And we're back, like we never left. Welcome to the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of your happy hump day evening with me here in New York. Once again, we're going to skip past all that promotional jazz and get right to the guts of the episode, which will be somewhat of a somber episode, I'm afraid to say. Now, today is a lot of famous people's birthday. I want to say Barbra Streisand, Mark Hamill, Luke Skywalker himself, Michael Douglas. But there is another very special, near and dear celebrity who would have turned 72 today were it not for an unspeakably tragic accident which happened when he was in his early 40s and which left him a quadriplegic for the last nearly decade of his life. On this day, 1952, Christopher Reeve was born. And Christopher Reeve, for most Gen Xers, some elder millennials, most Gen Xers, and everybody of the preceding generations who loved movies, Christopher Reeve was Superman. He will forever be identified as the first large-scale cinematic incarnation of Kal-El, Superman, Clark Kent. Guy came out of nowhere. He was a classically trained young actor. And there are certain things that happen in Hollywood that feel like they were just meant to be. It was just fate that these things didn't happen so that this would, because this feels like it was destiny, that this is how it was always going to go. You're not here to make a choice, Neo. You're here because you already made that choice. It's hard to imagine. There was a time in Hollywood where the concept of a big budget comic book movie, you'd get laughed out of the room. When Warner Brothers in the mid-1970s decided, hey, let's make a big budget spectacle movie about Jerry Schuster, I think was his name. The comic, Superman, let's do it. Now, I wish I could tell you that the studio always intended to have an unknown, a virtual unknown, playing the lead role, Kal-El, Clark Kent, Superman, but that's not what the studio wanted. Remember, whether it's Warner Brothers, whether it's Paramount, whether it's Universal, whether it's United Artists back in the day, whether it's MGM, nobody likes to lose money. You want as much of although there's no such thing as a sure thing, but you want as close to feeling comfortable of a sure thing as possible. So when they started discussing, well, who are we going to cast as Superman? The big names. Warren Beatty, not interested. Robert Redford, wanted too much money. Clint Eastwood, too busy. James Caan, I ain't putting on that fucking costume. I think that might be a direct quote from old Jimmy. The big stars all had their crack, their shot. The only one of those I mentioned that even really entertained the thought was Redford, but he wanted too much money. I don't actually think he wanted the role, but he was being diplomatic, and he asked for an amount that he knew they weren't going to go for. You know, he's a smart guy. Redford is playing chess while everyone else is playing marbles. He's one of those kind of guys. So the original idea to have a big star in the title role to make us feel more comfortable about all this fucking money we're going to spend, we might end up all losing our jobs, you know. They had to change the process midstream. What about if we cast a complete unknown in the lead and we surround him with the big names? That's the ticket. Well, that's what they ended up doing. That wasn't what they wanted to do, but sometimes circumstances compel you to change your thinking in midstream. They were already in for a lot of money, well into the millions, when all the big stars gave them the old middle finger. How they found Christopher Reeve anyway, it feels like a miracle. That there just happened to be this theater kid in New York who somehow looked like the guy in the comics. It was as if he was created, if you believe in such things, higher power, he was created specifically for this time. He was the perfect age at this time in history where Warner Brothers needed a guy who looked the part. He looks like the guy in the fucking comics. You know how many people said some variation on that when he was cast? When they started to, wow, look at this kid. So Christopher Reeve, unknown theater actor, classically trained. The great John Houseman, Oscar winner for The Paper Chase several years earlier, was one of his instructors. And Christopher Reeve was cast. And I will go down on this hill that his casting is the single greatest bit of casting in at least the last 50 years in Hollywood. That is how perfect he was. He made an incredible Superman, and you could argue he did even better work as Clark Kent. Doesn't really matter. 6 of one, half dozen of the other. He embodied what people wanted to believe that Superman could be. That he was somebody who was inherently decent and kind and good and wanted humans to be good, to do good. Or as Marlon Brando's Jor-El says, they have it in them to be great. With your light leading the way, they got a better chance. Although Brando, it's sort of blink and you miss it. He's only in the first, 10 whatever minutes of the film. And even though he really didn't, Reeve was not really that impressed with Brando's process. Christopher Reeve was not somebody who ever liked to drag his co-stars, but if you read between the lines of some of his quotes, I don't think that he appreciated Brando's shtick. Now bear in mind, they didn't work together that much. The early scenes on Krypton, Christopher Reeve's not involved in that. But he didn't think that Brando had the right take on a lot of different things. But Brando brought the gravitas of Marlon Brando, Don Vito Corleone, Stella! The weight of his career, even if he doesn't really give much of a performance. And he's wearing his Rolex. Or maybe they invented Rolexes on Krypton and that's why he's wearing a Rolex. Never figured that one out. But Brando is great in those early scenes, in my opinion. He does not phone it in. I believe in him. And Susanna York as the mom, I think she's terrific. And at Blink and You'll Miss It, speaking of Blink and You'll Miss It, Trevor Howard. If you didn't know that Trevor Howard was part of the High Council, I almost said the Jedi High Council, the Kryptonian High Council. If I didn't know that one of the guys was Trevor Howard, I wouldn't have known. I remember seeing him in the credits. Trevor Howard was in this? Superman is also an important film because it is one of the first movies that I ever saw in theaters. My parents, my mom, still going strong in Florida, and my dear old dad, the C in SCF and Co., they took their apple-cheeked 4-going-on-5-year-old boy to see Superman the movie just after Christmas, 1978. And I still remember fragments, but I believed a man could fly. And that man was played by Christopher Reeve. I feel like in a later era, just as we saw Johnny Depp get an Oscar nomination for Pirates of the Caribbean, and he could have won. I thought he was fucking phenomenal in that movie. Christopher Reeve is so good in the dual role. Could have nominated him for Best Actor. You tell me that incredible scene where he's picking up Lois and he's about to tell her who he is and then goes back to bumbling Clark. It's basically a masterclass in film acting in 30 seconds. I don't know another actor ever who could have handled that as beautifully as Christopher Reeve handled that. He was kind of underrated as an actor. Now, the kind of downside, he was typecast, no doubt about it. But he made 4 Superman movies. The first 2 are incredible. I would argue that Superman 2, even as dated as it is, it's certainly still in the top 5 greatest superhero movies. And the first one is just absolutely extraordinary. It takes so much time and care to tell a full, complete story. Christopher Reeve doesn't show up until at least 45 minutes plus have passed. Superman 3, not good. Superman 4, really not good. Reeve, though, always came across as a little bit, just maybe mildly uncomfortable with fame, although he was ready with a smile and he was incredibly gracious. I saw a clip earlier today wishing him happy birthday in Memoriam on social media, and it was a clip of him from when he appeared on The Tonight Show after Superman had been released and a lot of acclaim and people were going crazy about him, and the movie was made a ton of money. And he's on with Johnny Carson. And as luck would have it, before Christopher came out, Rodney Dangerfield did stand-up. And Christopher Reeve, I don't know that he had ever actually met Rodney Dangerfield. Now, obviously, he knew who Rodney was, and Rodney, oh, this is the kid, he knew who he was. But I don't think they had met. So when Christopher Reeve came out, he was such a big guy. I mean, Johnny Carson looked like a little munchkin standing next to him. Reeve was just a huge man. So Christopher Reeve shakes hands with Rodney Dangerfield, and unprompted, he said, people go to see my movie and it's $4.50 a ticket in some areas. You just did 10 minutes of some of the funniest stuff I've ever seen completely free. And the look on Rodney Dangerfield's face, he wasn't expecting Christopher Reeve to throw a bouquet of compliments his way. The look of shock and appreciation for just how humble and gracious this young man was. Rodney he couldn't believe it. He was in shock. Like, he didn't even have a rejoinder. He just kept saying, oh, nice kid, nice kid, nice kid. He really just seemed like a genuinely kind and decent person. He's what we call a genetic mega superior. You're not supposed to look like that guy. He was like a Cary Grant in his way. Later era, a George Clooney. A person just blessed with absurd good looks, incredible hair. I mean, he had Superman's hair, right? But he's built like a brick shithouse. Once he started working out, his muscles just popped. He was just one of those freaks in the best sense of the term. So his movie career, aside from Superman, unfortunately is hit or miss. And see, this is the thing. He had already achieved so much and accomplished so much when he had his horse riding accident. He was only 42. 42. And if you look earlier, if you look at the non-Superman movies, which I would consider terrific, Somewhere in Time with Jane Seymour, really good. It's corny, it's manipulative, it's complete ridicularity. But for a cornball, old school, four-hanky weeper romance, it's very good. And he and Jane Seymour had terrific chemistry in that film. Now, some of you may not know this, but he made a movie with Morgan Freeman in the mid-1980s called Street Smart. I don't think this movie would be made now, but Reeve plays a reporter who's kind of charging hard for a story, like a Pulitzer Prize-winning stuff, and he doesn't have it. So he fabricates a story about a pimp, and he comes up with all of this. He just makes up a whole bunch of stuff and puts forth that this really happened. Well, either fortunately or unfortunately, something very close to what he wrote did happen, unbeknownst to him, and Morgan Freeman plays the pimp. And if you knew nothing of Morgan Freeman, and this was the first time you ever saw him, you would say, holy shit, that guy is absolutely electric on screen. It's not a great movie, but it's the sort of film that got Morgan better roles. I think that got him Lean on Me, and it probably got him Johnny Handsome opposite Mickey Rourke, which wasn't really that much time later. What I think and consider to be Reeve's best performance, not Superman, it's so good that in a different year, he could have been nominated for Best Supporting Actor. So in what I consider to be the best movie year in history of Hollywood, 1993, Merchant and Ivory, Ismail Merchant, the producer, and James Ivory, the filmmaker, their adaptation of Kaz Ishigura's incredible, from what I understand, novel about, it's not Victorian England, but it's 1940s England, The Remains of the Day, starring Anthony Hopkins, Oscar nominated, Emma Thompson, Oscar nominated. It's a story of a butler in this unbelievably palatial English manor, like this manor house. They're probably somewhat connected to the royal family. I don't remember the exact connection. In fact, I'm pretty sure they are. Darlington, Lord Darlington. Well, World War II hasn't broken out yet. The United States is trying not to get involved, but circumstances are compelling them to do something other than stay back and let's just appease you-know-who. We don't need to get our hands dirty. Well, Christopher Reeve plays a United States Senator in this film. And he doesn't like what he's hearing. He doesn't like the idea of appeasement. And, well, we'll just give him this or we'll let him do that. And Reeve has a moment where he basically says, I don't want war. No one wants war. But there is something called peace at any price. And that is also unacceptable. And he almost can't believe that the people who are gathered here, who are involved in very serious negotiations, he thinks they're all a bunch of fucking idiots. And he doesn't make any bones about the fact that you guys have no business at this level of negotiations. You're a bunch of amateurs. You're a bunch of amateurs. And then he raises a glass to the professionals. And he's pissed off. And it is such a carefully calibrated performance because we really don't know anything about this guy other than that he's the lone American in this house for these very high-level talks. And he very slowly shows his disgust with what's going on. And it's not a question of blundering into war. It's a question of putting us in a very bad, disadvantageous position and doing it because we're so afraid to get involved. We're supposed to be the greatest country in the world. What am I doing here with these morons? What am I doing here? So, mild spoiler, Reeve's character ends up owning this property in his later years. And Anthony Hopkins is kind of living with him. He's kind of still working with him, but he doesn't have the same kind of life. But Reeve there is no trace of Superman. There are other movies where I kept waiting for him to pull open his shirt to show the S. He moves so far away from Superman in this film. It is just a phenomenal supporting performance. But again, that was the year Ralph Fiennes in Schindler's List, Pete Postlethwaite in The Name of the Father, John Malkovich in The Line of Fire, Leonardo DiCaprio, What's Eating Gilbert Grape, and the winner, Tommy Lee Jones in The Fugitive. There was no room for Christopher Reeve that year, as much as I would have loved to have seen him get a nomination. He made a movie not that many months before he was paralyzed called Above Suspicion. And I want you to Google this. It's painful to watch, just as when he took part in the remake of Alfred Hitchcock's Rear Window. Boy, it was good to see him on screen again. Some people were just made for celluloid. Christopher Reeve was one of them. But the movie Above Suspicion, it was with Joe Mantegna, and they play kind of rival cops on the same police department. And Christopher Reeve's character has a terrible accident in the world of the film, and either does or does not end up in a wheelchair. He plays a paraplegic in this film, or actually maybe he's not at all anything like that. Maybe he's just putting on a grand act for an insurance payoff. The movie kind of teases both ways. Is he really confined to a wheelchair? Is it temporary? Or is this guy just fucking full of shit. I don't know. But it is a very strong film. It's better than the kinds of made-for-HBO movies that they were doing at that time. They got better as they went along. But I saw an interview with him where he talked about how difficult it was to only act with his upper body and to have to keep his lower body completely still. He didn't give away any secrets of the movie in this interview. So I remember where I was when I heard the story that he had had a riding accident. Now, the internet existed, but nothing like it would become a very short time later. The fact that they were reporting on it, that he suffered a neck injury, I knew he was paralyzed. They wouldn't have bothered to report it otherwise. People get hurt all the time. And sure enough, it was almost fatal. He despaired. He needed a machine to breathe for most of the rest of his life. But somehow, the actor who played the greatest hero, the actor who played Superman, from a wheelchair, which he would always be in, became a champion for other people, paraplegics and quadriplegics. And he helped raise tens of millions of dollars, if not hundreds of millions of dollars, to further research. And there is a documentary that many of you know about called Superman, the Christopher Reeve story, which goes into this part of his life. Not just the big actor, big movie star, and not just the tragedy of the accident, but the hope that he brought. The fact that there are people who are walking that before Christopher Reeve got involved from his wheelchair, knowing that he was going to die prematurely, they would still be in wheelchairs. They are walking. The treatment methods, the research, the development of different drugs and different things, different rehab protocols. I mean, look at Dennis Bird. Dennis Bird was a guy they thought was never going to walk again, and he walked. Yeah, he actually was injured before Reeve. But there are things that medicine continued to develop. Different kinds of electrical impulse treatments to stimulate certain areas that we thought, well, this can't do anything. And stem cell research, of course, is a part of this kind of insanely advanced technology and things that were not possible when Christopher Reeve was injured. It's like he planted the tree or planted a tree that he was never going to benefit from. That's all he wanted to do. So this documentary film, Superman, which is under the imprimatur of DC Studios, and James Gunn didn't have a piece of the production. He knew what was going on, but he didn't, I don't think his name appears in the credits, but he has said it's just as extraordinary. He's the biggest Christopher Reeve fan there is. It's just as incredible a movie as you would hope, and does justice to this quite extraordinary man who was only 52 when he died in 2004. I am still hurt and gutted that he's been gone that long, that he isn't here, and that his lifelong BFF, they met when they were in their early 20s, he and Robin Williams, they both became stars right around the same time. It hurts me that Robin's gone, and he's been gone for 10 years. So much tragedy. Christopher's widow, Dana, she died less than 2 years after him. She died of lung cancer. She never smoked, and she died of lung cancer. So much tragedy, so much achievement, and so much of a life that consistently brings me to tears. Christopher Reeve, born 72 years ago today, gone, but never will he be forgotten. This has been episode 316 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of your happy hump day evening with me here in New York. If you check out this episode on the YouTube channel, haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, comment, share, turn on those notifications. Or if you catch this episode on the audio platforms such as Spotify, Podbean, iTunes, or the others, same general rule applies. Click like, subscribe, share, and turn on those notifications. I'll be back with a new episode real soon. Till then.